worse than 80. Smaller pot.
What can I say after all these things about the future? I work in the culture sector. My continuous concern is, what is happening to culture, what it means now, what it means for the future, what it means for cultural institutions, for instance. I'd like to see big trends, and as I've said in the discussion before, I see most things, happening very slowly. And one thing I want to talk with you about is that in the year 2020, there's some things we do know. I want to talk about two things, or we do know, but we can sort of, reasonably assume that will be. I'm 45 years old. I want to talk about generations with you a bit. I'm 45 years old. I'm sort of in between generations. I don't know how old you all are, but, before me is this huge baby boomer generation, the old hippies, and below me is like the internet generation. And I'm somewhere in the middle. People my age tend to sort of, move that way or that way. Either they resonate with the hippies or they resonate with the young kids. I saw this, and this is from a newspaper yesterday. It's in Dutch. It says, 11-year-old kid behind radical internet site. In Amsterdam, an 11-year-old boy has set up a radical Islamic internet site. Interestingly, at the same day, I was talking to somebody who knows a lot about developmental psychology, about how people develop during their lives, from when you're born to when you get old. And this is exactly, 11 years of age is exactly the type of age before you develop critical thinking. Young kids between the age of 4 and 11 are very more moralistic without being critical. They basically reproduce any kind of morals that they get thrown onto them. So it gets interesting when at 11 years old you have technical skills that are developed enough that you can make a website, whereas your critical skills, just because of your age, you can't even blame the kid because your age haven't developed that far. Whereas we have a whole other generation, the old baby boomers, that are in their 50s now, but they will be in their 60s and 70s in 2020. That is exactly the opposite. They are very critical. They've been they grew up. And that's why I'm calling it hippies 2.0. And it's a very interesting generation, if not because it's so big. In the year 2020, the hippie baby boom generation is retired, intelligent, articulate, healthy, wealthy. They have a lot of money. They have time enough, and maybe they're even bored. What are these people going to do when, 10 years, 15 years from now? And but they're all hippies. The whole idea of, doing something meaningful with your life is something that resonates with this generation very well. You can always say that they grew up being critical about society, about everything. And they're really hot for meaning. They really look for meaningful things. And the whole idea of meaning 1.0, you could say, that's them. The authority, well-researched things. Where is quality? It's very much a baby boomer type argument. So 15 years from now, we'll have a whole generation of people who think like this, use these kinds of tools to reflect on the world like this. I mean, with very much a meaning 1.0 mentality, you could say, using Internet 2.0, Web 2.0 tools, if not something new. So then there's another point that relates to culture. In the year 2020, culture has become central to everything we do in society. I think that's also something that is very much overlooked. We tend to see, which has been the case, for a long time, we tend to see culture as a sector of society, like economy, like sport, like tourism, like security, like education. As culture is just one of these sectors in society. But as we've been talking about these interest groups or these self-help groups or people, communities that are organizing themselves more or less informally, and all these groups, whether they're economic or whether they're concerned with transportation or sports, it doesn't matter. They're all making media, or care. So in all these sectors of society, meaning is becoming more and more important. It's a huge trend that's going to last for decades. Because it's all about information, and information does not exist without meaning. Meaning will become more important everywhere. And what's interesting is that this means things for the culture sector, although the culture sector doesn't really realize what it means. We have museums, we have libraries, we have broadcasters, we have all these different types of cultural institutions. And they will have to get used to a society that looks at them for meaning. Like in the culture sector, this may sound arrogant, but in the culture sector, we know what meaning is. Well, we may not be able to define it, but we work with meaning every day. It's pretty much the only thing that we do. We produce meaning. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, but that's the idea. If you're in the economy sector, you produce money. That's the idea there. But once you need money for economy, you can start mixing them up. So we'll have to find something of organizing the way our cultural sector, the people the artists, makers, the people who have much experience with generating meaning, how to use them or how to use their knowledge in all the other sectors of society. So by the year 2020, we have a creducation sector, which is a combination of creativity and education. And it contains what now is the ICT, the culture, and the education sector. Technology won't be the problem. 15, 20 years from now, the problem will be how to raise the level of proficiency in self-expression. So the whole debate about copyright or about information is not that interesting. If you're really good at producing content, you'll make money as a teacher rather than as a maker. You'll build your reputation as a maker, but then other people will want you to help them, to inspire people. And so it becomes a society of inspiration. Everybody wants to produce things that are more meaningful, even in an old-fashioned type of way. And so the excellent makers, they're the heroes of the amateurs, and they make money as teachers, guides, and mentors. So basically, our cultural institutions will have become schools, different types of schools, for all the other institutions in society. And whatever it is that they make it for their reputation, to show them what they can do, or how it could be done, if it's done really, really well. We've talked about a lot about amateurs this afternoon, so this is something I actually found out, I realized recently. What is an amateur? Anybody, I'm not looking for a definition, but does anybody realize where the word comes from?
Somebody who does it for love.
Yes. It comes from amare, to love. Somebody who does something because they love it. It doesn't mean they're bad at it, or they're not good at it, or it doesn't mean they get paid or they don't get paid, for it. So the whole distinction between amateur versus professional is you either love something or you get paid for it. That's kind of strange. And meaning, I guess we can safely say that meaning works well when it's made by people who love it, rather than by people who get paid for it. So it's actually interesting what will produce the best, either quality or meaning. Having people who love it do things, or people who get paid for it do things. That's one who loves. So at the age of 70, you're a post-80 baby boomer. How can you become a better lover? And I'll give you one example of, for instance, the museum world. We now have, how much time do we have? Okay. I'll dive into the whole museum idea. We now have museums that are basically a collection of there are objects there, There are curators who determine which objects to buy, which objects not to buy, and there are, depending on the kind of museum, educational departments or exhibitors, people who present the objects to the world. And very often, the things that curators find interesting are not the things that people find interesting. Because the curators have like a very, very professional, very expert-like art historical view on these objects, whereas you and I, living in society, might have a completely different interest, thematically, for instance. But there's no way that we don't even know what's in the depths of museums. So the scenario I propose is one where we have, and we'll join Belgium and Holland all together. We'll collect all the objects in all our museums. We'll store them in one big, huge warehouse somewhere in a Dutch polder. We have like lots of folders with lots of space. So like all the stuff will be there. We'll fire the curators. They're either going to become like, they're going to work at universities so they can study art history. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just like a museum is not the place to do that. But we'll either give them jobs at universities or we'll make them teachers, coaches to help the audience curate the collections. And the exhibits are made by societies, like we talked about, groups of people who have a specific interest, who want to tell a specific story, who use the collection of a museum to tell their story. And of course, right, all these volunteer baby boomers. Lots of them. They don't want money, they just want something meaningful to do. So like curate all these collections in our country. And they're expert lovers of history. So this is sort of an illustration of that idea. Now this is the current situation. We have different types of objects in specific museums. This is a huge depot. This is a specific exhibition about a certain theme, about love and hate, whatever. This is a specific exposition. These are virtual expositions. This is actually somebody who organizes an exposition of the real objects from a museum in a gallery space. So the objects have disappeared here and they're now here, and we can look at them. And we can basically, we separate the storage of the objects from the generation of meaning by people, society, formal parties, informal groups, what have you. And curators and educational departments of museums, as we know them now, basically coach these people doing this. And it's not a very silly idea, because one of the museums I work for is in Gouda in Holland. And their director got a phone call a couple of weeks ago from somebody who collected Kerststalletjes, Christmas stables. What do you call it? What's the English word for Christmas?
Creches. A creche.
Okay.
It's a creche.
So there's like turns out there's a whole community in Holland and Belgium of people who know everything about these things. So they call this historical museum in Gouda and say, well, wouldn't this be interesting as an exhibition for you? And like every museum, at this point says, I don't think so. Thank you very much. Goodbye. We have our own agenda. But this director said, well, let's talk. So now he's actively trying to see if he can help this huge community that collects these things. And they have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of distinctions between different kinds, and those are more beautiful than those, blah, blah. But they don't know how to make an exhibition. The museum has knowledge about how to make an exposition. So I think in the coming years, it is really the big challenge for all of us is to really figure out what knowledge it is in our culture sector that we have that we can really use to support other parties in society and help them maybe figure it out themselves. But we have to actively help them because it will make this place better. So that's it.
Great exhibition in the UK recently. A couple of artists decided to research every stuffed polar bear that exists in all the stately homes around, and there are a lot of them. They produce a nice book of them, and they